The neighborhood was quiet, almost too quiet for the middle of the afternoon. Birds chirped softly and the sun shone warmly over the rows of modest houses. On this particular street, life seemed calm and ordinary, but beneath the calm, tension had been quietly building for weeks. People whispered about a gang that had started to make trouble in the area, young men who thought they could take whatever they wanted without consequence. Most neighbors had learned to lock their doors and keep to themselves, but some thought the danger was exaggerated. Among them lived a woman who had seen enough of the world to know how to stay alert without letting fear control her life. She was a strong woman in her late 30s, the kind of person who carried herself with quiet confidence. She had moved to the neighborhood a few years ago, looking for a place where she could have some peace. A small house with a yard where her dog could run freely. Her dog was a large, powerful breed, loyal and alert, but also gentle with her and the few people she trusted. The dog had been with her for years, and they shared a bond that went beyond words. It was more than a pet. It was a companion and a protector. Her days followed a steady routine. She woke early, brewed her coffee, and took her dog for a long walk around the neighborhood. The walk was not just for exercise. It was a way to see who was around, to notice changes, to stay connected to her surroundings. She would wave to neighbors who passed by, sometimes exchanging a few words, always careful to observe the little details that might tell her more than anyone would say out loud. The quiet streets with their neat lawns and flower beds gave the illusion of safety, but she knew that appearances could be deceiving. Over the past few weeks, she had started to notice signs of trouble. Windows had been left open and broken in other houses, small items had gone missing, and the occasional loud argument would echo from the nearby street late at night. People talked about a gang that had been moving through the area, young men with little respect for anyone and a growing reputation for racial prejudice. The neighbors who had once ignored warnings now whispered behind closed doors, worried about what might happen next. The woman listened without panic, but she did not ignore what she saw. She had learned early in life that preparation and awareness were better than fear. Her dog was always at her side during these walks, tail low but alert, ears swiveling to catch every sound. The dog seemed to sense things before she did, pausing mid-step, muscles tense, nose twitching. There was a silent understanding between them. She didn't need to speak. A look or a gesture was enough. Over time, she had come to rely on her dog's instincts as much as her own judgment. It was a partnership built on trust, patience, and respect, and it had kept her safe more times than she could count. The gang first caught her attention one afternoon while she was walking. They were leaning against a streetlight, laughing too loudly, tossing empty bottles into the grass. They looked around with arrogance, as if the whole neighborhood belonged to them. When she passed by, her dog walking close at her side, she noticed the subtle glance they gave her. It was quick, almost dismissive, but there was a hint of calculation in their eyes. They were sizing her up, deciding if she was worth their attention. She met their gaze steadily, never backing down, and kept walking, ignoring the attempt to intimidate her. That evening, as she returned home, she felt a subtle shift in the air. There was a tension that wasn't there before, a sense that someone was watching. She locked her doors and double-checked the windows, a habit that had become second nature. Inside, the house felt safe, familiar, warm, but she didn't let her guard down. She knew that people who intended harm often looked for small weaknesses, moments when someone was distracted or complacent. She moved quietly, checking each room as her dog followed close behind, alert to any unusual sounds. The next few days were quieter than she expected, but the unease didn't fade. She started noticing small signs that the gang had been nearby. A broken fence latch, footprints in the garden, trash tossed in unusual places. Nothing of major value was missing yet, but the message was clear. They were testing her, trying to see if she would react, if she would be afraid. But she didn't let it show. She kept her routine, walked her dog in the afternoons, tended her garden in the mornings, and watched the street with calm, careful eyes. Her dog seemed to sense the growing danger even more. At night, it would lie near the door, ears perked, eyes alert to every creak and whisper of wind. She spoke to it quietly, praising its alertness, knowing that the dog's instincts could be her first line of defense. She also spent time thinking ahead, imagining different scenarios and planning how she would respond. She had learned that preparation was empowering, and she would not give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her panic. One evening, She noticed the gang again, this time from her kitchen window. They were on the street corner, speaking quietly but with intensity, glancing at her house more than once. Their confidence was obvious. They thought they had found an easy target. She watched them, not with fear, but with careful observation. She noticed how they moved, how they communicated, small details that could be useful if things escalated. She made a mental note of each person, their faces, their mannerisms, the way they laughed. Every detail counted. She went to bed that night with a quiet sense of resolve. The world could be unpredictable and cruel, but she was not defenseless. Her dog lay at the foot of the bed, its breathing calm but alert, ready to respond if anything disturbed the peace. She thought about the life she had built, the quiet joys she enjoyed, and the ways she had learned to stand her ground. The neighborhood may have seemed calm to some, but she knew that strength often lived in quiet vigilance, in the ability to face danger without letting it take away your sense of self. The next morning, the sun rose over the street, casting long shadows across the lawns. She brewed her coffee and looked out the window, her dog at her side. There was a strange mix of normalcy and tension in the air. People moved about their lives, unaware of the eyes that watched from the corners, the hands that reached for things that were not theirs. But she was ready. She was not just another woman living quietly in a house. She was alert, prepared, and unwilling to be underestimated. As she stepped outside for her morning walk, her dog leading the way, she felt a quiet determination. The neighborhood could be unpredictable and the gang could be reckless, but she was not defenseless. Every step she took was measured, every glance purposeful. She noticed a few neighbors waving from across the street and she smiled, offering a simple nod. There was a sense of community, of subtle support even in the quietest moments. She carried herself with calm assurance, letting the world know without words that she was not someone to be trifled with. The gang continued to watch from a distance, unaware that they were being studied as closely as they studied her. They saw a woman walking a dog, tending her garden, living her life as if nothing could touch her. They did not yet realize that she was far from an easy target. Her dog's presence alone was a warning, a signal that they were about to learn the hard way that some people are not to be underestimated. By the end of the day, she returned home, a sense of quiet satisfaction settling over her. She had walked, observed, and planned, reinforcing her control over her life and surroundings. The sun dipped low in the sky and the neighborhood fell into that delicate balance between calm and anticipation. She knew that challenges could come, that people could make foolish choices, but she also knew that she had the tools, the instincts, and the strength to face whatever came next. Her dog lay at her side, a loyal companion and guardian, reminding her that she was never truly alone. And so, the stage was set. The calm of the neighborhood remained, but beneath it tension lingered. The gang may have thought they had found an easy target, a woman they could intimidate, but they had no idea what awaited them. She was calm, vigilant, and prepared, and her dog, her steadfast companion, was ready to protect her at any cost. Little did they know, their miscalculation would soon become their greatest mistake. The night was quiet, almost eerily so. Streetlights cast long, thin shadows across the sidewalks, and the occasional car passed by, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Inside her home, she went about her usual evening routine. The kitchen was warm with the soft hum of the refrigerator, and the smell of freshly brewed tea lingered in the air. Her dog lay near the door, ears twitching every so often, alert to the smallest sound. There was a calm in the house, but it was a careful, watchful calm. She had learned long ago that appearances of peace could be deceptive. Outside, the gang had gathered a few blocks away, huddled in the shadows. They whispered among themselves, excitement and arrogance mixing in their voices. They believed tonight would be easy. They had been watching her for days, noting her routines, and thought they had the perfect opportunity. They assumed her calm demeanor meant she was weak, that she would be surprised and frightened. They had no idea how wrong they were. She had felt something was off earlier in the evening. It wasn't fear, just a quiet awareness, the kind of instinct that comes from experience. She had double-checked her doors, locked the windows, and made sure her phone was within reach. Her dog, sensing her alertness, shifted slightly, standing close to her as if to say, "I'm ready." There was an unspoken communication between them, a rhythm built over years. They didn't need words to understand each other. A glance or a shift in posture was enough. As the gang approached her house, they moved slowly, trying to stay unnoticed. They whispered harshly to each other, mocking what they assumed would be her fear. One of them reached for the door handle, but it was locked, as she had expected. They exchanged frustrated glances, unsure of how to proceed. Her dog's low growl rumbled through the quiet night, almost unnoticed at first, but growing steadily louder. The gang paused, confused and unnerved by the sudden warning. They thought it was just a dog barking, nothing more. But the growl carried a weight that made them hesitate. She stayed inside, calm, watching the shadows move through her window. She had time to think, to plan her next moves carefully. She reached for her phone, keeping it hidden in her hand, ready to call for help if necessary. But more than calling the authorities, she also knew she could handle the situation herself if needed. She had faced challenges before in different ways, and she had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. The gang finally forced the door open, expecting resistance, expecting her to panic. But the moment they stepped inside, the dog moved with precision. It wasn't just barking now. It lunged forward, teeth bared, muscles tensed. The men froze, caught off guard by the sheer force and speed of the animal. It wasn't aggressive for aggression's sake. It was protecting its home and its person. One of the men stumbled backward, hitting the wall, while another tried to push past the dog. Every attempt to intimidate was met with controlled strength and precision. She stayed back, keeping herself safe, observing their movements. She knew any sudden panic could make the situation worse. She kept her voice calm, clear and commanding, speaking in a tone that left no doubt. She was not afraid, and she was ready to defend herself. Her dog responded to her silent cues, moving in coordination, blocking paths, and keeping the intruders from advancing further. The gang had expected an easy theft, a quick grab, and a run. Instead, they found themselves trapped in their own confusion, facing an unexpected force they hadn't counted on. One of the gang members tried to grab a nearby object to intimidate the dog or her, but the dog anticipated the movement, stepping forward and growling more aggressively. The intruder hesitated, fear finally starting to replace his earlier arrogance. They had assumed that a single woman and her pet would be no match for their strength in numbers, but they were quickly learning how wrong they were. The balance of power had shifted in seconds, and the gang was losing control. She carefully edged closer to the phone, keeping her movements deliberate and slow. Her eyes never left the intruders, and her dog never left her side. The dog's loyalty and focus were unwavering, and it was clear that anyone who underestimated it would regret doing so. She dialed the police silently, keeping the device low and hidden from view, making sure she was ready to alert them without escalating the situation further. Her calmness contrasted sharply with the gang's panic, highlighting the intelligence and patience she brought to the encounter. The intruders began to argue among themselves, confusion and fear making them reckless. They had underestimated both her and her dog, and now their arrogance was crumbling. One of them whispered something in fear. Another cursed under his breath, but there was no cohesion, no plan that could salvage the situation. Every second they hesitated. The dog's presence and her composed watchfulness reminded them that they were not in control. She quietly moved to a safer position, staying near the door and making sure she had a clear path in case she needed to escape. She noticed their faces, their expressions, their body language, all valuable information should they try to return in the future. She had learned to observe even in moments of tension, knowing that awareness could be as powerful as action. Her dog remained vigilant, positioning itself between her and the intruders, responding instantly to any small movement. Finally, realizing they were losing, the gang retreated in a flurry of panic. They stumbled over each other, muttering curses, and ran back into the night, leaving behind the items they had hoped to steal and a sense of humiliation that would sting long after they disappeared. The dog barked until they were out of sight, then returned to her side, standing guard. Ears still perked, muscles still tense. She knelt to pat the dog, whispering words of praise, grateful for its unwavering loyalty and bravery. Even as adrenaline ebbed away, she remained alert. She walked through her home, checking doors and windows, ensuring that nothing had been overlooked. She made notes in her mind about what had happened, what she could do to improve security, and how to respond if they ever returned. Her calmness and preparedness were her strength, and she had demonstrated it in a moment that could have gone very differently. By the time the police arrived, she was seated calmly, her dog lying quietly at her feet. She explained the situation clearly, detailing every observation she had made. The officers were impressed by her composure, the dog's training, and the clear evidence that the intruders had underestimated both of them. The gang members were still out there, scattered in the neighborhood, but they had learned an important lesson. Appearances could be deceiving, and not every target was easy. Neighbors who had watched from a distance began to emerge, drawn by the commotion and the sound of barking. They were surprised to see her calm demeanor, the dog's protective stance, and the way she had handled the situation with intelligence rather than panic. They whispered among themselves, realizing that this woman they had always seen as quiet and independent was far more capable than they had imagined. Respect and admiration grew silently as the story of her bravery spread through the neighborhood. As night deepened and the streets returned to their quiet state, she sat on her porch sipping her tea, the dog resting beside her. She reflected on the events of the evening, grateful for the bond she shared with her dog, for her own quick thinking, and for the ability to face danger without fear controlling her actions. The gang may have thought they were in control, but in reality they had walked into a situation they were entirely unprepared for. The experience left a lasting impression. It wasn't just about the immediate threat. It was about awareness, preparation, and trust. Trust in herself and in her companion. She had turned a dangerous moment into a demonstration of strength and intelligence, showing that courage often looks quiet and deliberate, not loud or reckless. And her dog, loyal and committed, had been more than a protector. It had been a partner in every sense, responding to cues she hadn't even spoken aloud. The night ended with the sense of quiet victory. She had defended her home, herself, and her way of life. The gang had failed, not just because they were outmatched physically, but because they had underestimated the courage, intelligence, and preparedness of someone they thought would be an easy target. And in the stillness of her home, with the dog curled at her side, she knew that the bond they shared had just proven itself in the most meaningful way possible. Even as she prepared for sleep, her mind remained alert, reviewing the night, planning for the days ahead, considering improvements to her home security, and making sure her dog's vigilance would always be supported. She had faced danger and come out stronger, and she knew that no matter what the future held, she was ready. Her dog, her faithful companion, would always be there, ready to act, ready to protect, and ready to remind anyone foolish enough to underestimate her that some things are never as easy as they seem. The gang had made a mistake they would not forget, and she had made a statement without saying a single word. Strength, courage, and intelligence often come in quiet, determined forms, and underestimating them could be the biggest mistake of all. The morning after the failed break-in, the neighborhood seemed quieter than usual, but she knew that calm was deceptive. The gang had retreated in panic, humiliated and shaken by what they had encountered, but she also knew that people who acted recklessly once often returned with more determination. She spent the morning walking her dog, keeping her eyes and ears alert, noticing the subtle signs that others might miss, footprints along the edges of lawns, the faint smell of someone who had been nearby, even small disturbances in the trash. These were the clues that told her the gang was still in the area, planning their next move. Back at her home, she went through her daily routine with precision, tending to her small garden and checking the locks and windows once more. Her dog followed her closely, ears alert, eyes scanning every shadow. The bond between them had only grown stronger after the previous night. She spoke softly to the dog, praising its loyalty and courage, and in return it seemed to understand that more vigilance would be needed in the coming days. This was not the time for complacency. She decided to make small changes around the house to improve security. Motion sensor lights were installed, and she made sure that cameras were strategically placed to cover all entry points. These were not extravagant measures, just careful, thoughtful adjustments to protect her home and herself. She knew that prevention was as important as response, and she approached every detail with calm determination. Every small adjustment was a reminder that she was not an easy target. The gang, meanwhile, had gathered a few blocks away, frustrated and bitter about their earlier failure. Their confidence had been shaken, and they were eager to reclaim the sense of control they believed was theirs. They whispered about how to approach her house again, mocking themselves for being caught off guard by a dog and a calm, prepared woman. They believed that they could outsmart her if they planned carefully this time, if they approached with stealth and coordination, but their arrogance blinded them to the fact that she had already anticipated retaliation. She noticed subtle changes in the neighborhood over the next few days. Occasionally, she would spot shadows moving near her house, or she would hear hushed voices as she walked her dog. The gang was testing boundaries again, leaving small signs meant to intimidate. They left trash near her garden, scratched marks on the fence, and sometimes stared openly from a distance. It was a psychological game meant to unsettle her, but she refused to let it succeed. She observed everything quietly, recording details in her mind, aware that these signs were hints about the gang's next moves. Her dog's behavior mirrored the growing tension. At night, it patrolled the house more actively, standing near doors and windows, ears twitching at the smallest noise. She praised it for its diligence, understanding that instinct and loyalty were powerful tools. The dog had become more than a companion. It was a partner, and together they formed a team that was attentive, prepared, and alert to danger. She felt a quiet sense of reassurance knowing that she was never alone, that there was a living shield beside her, ready to respond to any threat. Neighbors began noticing the tension too. Some approached her cautiously, offering small gestures of concern or seeking advice about their own safety. She remained composed, giving guidance without drawing unnecessary attention to herself. Her calm presence reassured them, but also signaled that she was capable and ready to handle whatever challenges might come. Respect began to grow quietly, as people realized that she was someone who did not need to be protected. She was fully capable of protecting herself. The gang, growing more desperate, attempted smaller acts to provoke fear. They would knock on doors late at night, leave threatening messages, and make noises near the edges of her property. Each act was meant to test her courage, to see if she would falter, but she did not panic. She moved deliberately, responded calmly, and always maintained control. Her dog's presence was enough to unsettle the gang, and her quiet determination made them question whether their efforts were worth the risk. One evening, she sat on her porch, the dog lying close to her feet, and thought through the possibilities. She imagined what the gang might do next and prepared contingencies for each scenario. Her mind worked steadily, planning routes for escape, ways to alert the authorities, and strategies for using the dog's skills effectively. She knew that mental preparation was as important as physical readiness, and she focused on building layers of security and awareness. She was not living in fear. She was living in vigilance. The gang's return was inevitable. They began to circle the neighborhood more frequently, testing reactions and looking for signs of weakness. They believed that she might grow tired, distracted, or careless. But each time they approached, she was ready. Her daily walks became strategic, her presence and routine a constant assertion that she would not be intimidated. Her dog, always at her side, responded to every sound, every shift in the wind with immediate alertness. The gang was becoming increasingly aware that they had underestimated both her and her dog. One afternoon, while walking through the yard, she noticed a figure lingering near the corner of her property. The person froze when they saw her, but she didn't flinch. Her dog moved slightly ahead, body tense, tail low, growling softly. The figure hesitated, realizing that their usual tactics of intimidation might not work here. They muttered something to an unseen companion and retreated, leaving her standing quietly, her composure intact. The message was clear. She was alert, aware, and prepared, and any attempt to scare her would fail. That night, she double-checked her home again, moving through each room with methodical precision. Windows were locked, doors were secure, and motion sensor lights were tested. She walked the dog through the yard, letting it sniff and survey every corner, reinforcing the bond of trust and communication between them. Every detail mattered. She knew that small missteps could create opportunities for danger, and she refused to give the gang any advantage. Vigilance was her armor, and it had been strengthened by experience and observation. The gang, frustrated by their inability to intimidate her, began discussing more aggressive plans. They wanted to strike quickly and decisively, thinking that surprise and speed would overcome her defenses. But their impatience and overconfidence blinded them to the fact that she was ready. She anticipated their next steps, had prepared her dog to respond instantly, and had ensured that her home was monitored and secure. They were walking into a situation they could not control. She spent the next few days quietly reinforcing her surroundings. Lights were adjusted, cameras repositioned, and she kept a close watch on the neighborhood. Her movements were calm, deliberate, and natural, giving no hint of fear or urgency. This was the difference between her and the gang. She acted with intelligence, patience, and foresight, while they acted with recklessness and arrogance. Her dog remained close, alert to every subtle sound, every movement outside the walls of their home. Neighbors began to notice that she seemed unshakable. They watched as she tended her garden, walked her dog, and interacted with the world calmly, even when suspicious figures were nearby. Her example inspired a quiet sense of admiration. People realized that courage and preparedness were not loud or showy. They were steady, deliberate, and rooted in confidence. And as the gang grew bolder, they were unaware that the woman they hoped to intimidate had already outmaneuvered them at every turn. By the end of the week, it was clear that the gang's usual tactics would not succeed. Their frustration grew, their patience waned, and their confidence faltered. The woman and her dog had not just defended a home, they had asserted a presence, a warning, and a lesson. No intimidation, no matter how aggressive, could shake the resolve of someone who understood vigilance, preparation, and loyalty. As she sat quietly in her living room, her dog curled at her feet, she reflected on the situation. She was proud, not of the confrontation itself, but of how calmly she had handled it, how she had maintained control and protected her home without panic. She had turned a potential danger into an opportunity to demonstrate courage and intelligence, showing that strength often comes in quiet, deliberate forms. And her dog, ever loyal and attentive, had been an essential part of that strength. The gang, meanwhile, continued to plot from a distance, unaware that their overconfidence and misjudgment had already sealed the outcome of any future attempts. The woman had set the rules without a single shout or threat. She had relied on awareness, preparation, and the bond she shared with her dog, proving that courage was not measured by aggression but by composure, intelligence, and unwavering commitment. The streets returned to their quiet rhythm, though tension lingered just below the surface. People went about their days unaware of the lessons quietly unfolding in one particular home. But the woman knew that she had shifted the balance of power, that she had established safety and control in a situation where recklessness had seemed inevitable. And as she walked her dog that evening, feeling the warmth of the fading sun and the calm vigilance in the dog's steady presence, she understood that some lessons were learned not with force, but with quiet determination, preparation, and loyalty. The gang may have thought that they could intimidate her, that a simple show of strength would be enough, but they had already discovered their mistake. She was not someone to be underestimated, and her dog was more than a companion. They were a team that would defend what was theirs, with intelligence, courage, and unwavering loyalty. And that knowledge, quiet but powerful, gave her a sense of calm strength that no amount of threats could shake. The night was heavier than usual, a strange mix of quiet and tension hanging over the neighborhood. The wind rustled leaves softly, and distant sounds of cars passing by seemed sharper, more noticeable. Inside her home, she moved deliberately, her mind alert, her dog close at her side. The recent days had made it clear. The gang was not finished. They were planning one last attempt, desperate to prove themselves after their earlier humiliations. But she was ready. Calm, prepared, and determined, she would not let them intimidate her, or anyone else. Her dog sensed the tension immediately. Its body was tense, ears pricked, eyes scanning every corner of the house. The low growl it produced was subtle but unmistakable, a warning to anyone who might try to enter uninvited. She spoke quietly to it, her voice calm but commanding, and the dog responded instantly, a silent understanding passing between them. Together they were more than a person and a pet. They were a team built on trust, vigilance, and loyalty. Outside, the gang crept toward the house, moving carefully in the shadows. They had learned to be stealthier after their first failed attempt, thinking that patience and coordination would overcome their previous mistakes. But their confidence was tinged with nervousness. Deep down, each of them sensed that this time could end badly if they were discovered. They did not know just how prepared she had become. As they approached, she noticed subtle changes in the way the shadows moved. Her instincts, sharpened by previous encounters, told her that someone was near. She stayed calm, moving quietly to observe without revealing her presence too early. Her dog followed her lead, silently shifting to block entrances and alert to the smallest sound. Every movement was deliberate, every step measured, as she prepared to face the intruders on her own terms. The gang reached the edge of her yard, thinking that this time they could get inside unnoticed. One of them tried the back door, hoping it might be unlocked or easier to breach. The dog was already there, growling deeply, its stance unyielding. The man froze, startled by the dog's sudden presence. He whispered something to his friends, but it was too late. The dog's awareness and positioning made it impossible for them to advance without facing immediate resistance. Inside the house, she stayed calm, watching from a safe vantage point. She had her phone ready, the camera capturing every movement, but she did not rely solely on technology. She relied on her awareness, her instincts, and the loyalty of the dog at her side. She knew that panic would only make the situation worse. Her calmness was her strength, and it radiated through the house and out into the yard. The gang hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. One of them stepped forward, trying to assert dominance, but the dog shifted instantly, growling louder, teeth showing. The man froze again, realizing that the dog would not back down, that the woman inside had likely anticipated this very moment. Their plan of surprise had failed before it even began. The gang was losing control, and fear began to creep into their minds. She finally moved slightly, positioning herself in a spot where she could be seen without putting herself in immediate danger. Her voice was calm, clear, and firm. "You need to leave," she said, not shouting, but speaking in a tone that left no room for argument. Her dog moved closer to her, a silent reinforcement of her words. The intruders looked at each other nervously, unsure if they should retreat or attempt to push forward. Their previous arrogance had evaporated, replaced with hesitation and fear. The gang tried to advance again, thinking that boldness might work. One of them reached for a nearby object to intimidate the dog or force his way in. But the dog reacted instantly, moving with precision and authority. The man stumbled back, fear replacing the bravado he had shown earlier. Every attempt to push forward was met with careful resistance, and each failure chipped away at the gang's confidence. She kept her movements minimal but strategic. Every glance, every shift in her body was deliberate, guiding the dog's responses without needing to speak loudly. Her control over the situation was evident, and it became clear to the gang that their overconfidence had been their downfall. They had underestimated both her courage and the dog's loyalty. Each second of hesitation made it more obvious that this confrontation was not going the way they had imagined. Finally, one of the gang members whispered to the others, suggesting retreat. The tension was palpable. They had thought this would be a quick strike, an easy victory. But now they were facing the consequences of underestimating someone they thought they could intimidate. One by one, they began to back away, casting nervous glances at the dog, unsure of whether they could escape without harm. The woman remained calm, her voice still firm and steady, ensuring they understood that leaving was the only option. As the last intruder turned to flee, the dog barked loudly, a final warning that reinforced her command. They disappeared into the shadows, muttering curses under their breath, humiliated and shaken. The street returned to silence, the tension slowly dissipating. She let out a breath she had not realized she had been holding, her dog relaxing slightly but still alert. The house was safe, her home defended, and the lesson had been made clear. No one should underestimate her, and no one should underestimate the loyalty and commitment of her dog. The police arrived shortly after, alerted by her earlier preparations. She calmly explained the situation, detailing every movement and every observation. The officers were impressed not just by the dog's behavior, but by her composure and strategic thinking. The intruders were gone, but their faces, actions, and mistakes had been recorded. The woman had managed the situation with intelligence and care, turning a dangerous moment into a demonstration of courage and foresight. Neighbors, who had watched from a distance, began to emerge, whispering among themselves in awe. They had seen a quiet woman and her dog confront danger with a calm that they could hardly imagine. Respect for her grew silently, a recognition of strength that did not need loud words or exaggerated gestures. She had not only defended herself, but had reminded the neighborhood that courage often looks quiet, deliberate, and thoughtful. Later that night, she walked through the house, checking locks and windows once more. Her dog followed her closely, ears pricked, eyes scanning the room. She spoke softly, praising its loyalty and vigilance, and it responded with subtle movements, tail wagging slightly, eyes alert. She felt a quiet pride in the partnership they had built, in the way they had faced danger together. The dog had not just protected her physically, it had reinforced her confidence, her control, and her ability to respond effectively. She spent the evening reflecting on the events, thinking about the gang and the lessons learned. They had assumed that a single woman living alone would be an easy target. They had underestimated her intelligence, her awareness, and her ability to act decisively. They had underestimated the bond she shared with her dog, a bond built on years of trust, loyalty, and mutual understanding. Their arrogance had been their downfall. In the quiet of the night, she sat on the porch sipping tea, the dog lying close to her feet. The air was calm, but she remained vigilant, knowing that peace was not guaranteed by luck but by preparation. She had turned the potential for danger into an opportunity to demonstrate strength, strategy, and courage. The intruders had fled, humiliated and defeated, while she remained composed, protected, and in control. The neighborhood, unaware of the full intensity of the confrontation, carried on with its evening routines. Cars passed, doors closed quietly, and distant conversations drifted through the night air. But in her home, the lessons were clear. Preparation, awareness, and loyalty were more powerful than reckless aggression. The dog's unwavering commitment had made the difference, and her calm intelligence had ensured the safety of her home. By the end of the night, the house returned to a peaceful rhythm. Her dog settled beside her, ears still attentive, body relaxed but ready. She felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that she had faced danger without panic, that she had acted with intelligence and courage, and that she had established a boundary that no one would dare cross again. The gang had learned a hard lesson, and she had reinforced her own sense of security and control. She reflected on the evening as she prepared for bed, understanding that strength often comes in quiet, deliberate forms. Courage is not measured by noise, by shouting, or by reckless action. It is measured by composure, by awareness, and by the ability to act decisively when it matters most. And her dog, her loyal companion, had been central to that strength, a living reminder that trust, loyalty, and preparedness are powerful forces. The night ended with the sense of quiet victory. She had defended her home, herself, and her peace. The gang had failed, not because of luck or circumstance, but because they had underestimated both her and the dog who stood unwaveringly by her side. And as she drifted to sleep, she knew that no matter what challenges might come, she was ready, alert, and stronger for what had passed. The morning after the final confrontation, the neighborhood seemed unusually quiet, almost as if it was holding its breath. Birds sang softly in the trees, and the sunlight bathed the streets in warmth, but she knew that calm was fragile. The gang had fled the night before, humiliated and shaken, but she also knew that some people never truly learned from their mistakes. She spent the early morning walking her dog, observing the streets, listening carefully for any unusual sounds. The dog walked close to her, alert, but calm, and she felt a quiet reassurance in its steady presence. As she returned home, neighbors began to emerge, curious about what had happened. Word had spread quickly through whispered conversations and cautious glances. People had seen shadows moving in the night, heard the barking, and noticed the gang's sudden retreat. They approached her carefully, their faces showing a mixture of relief, admiration, and curiosity. She greeted them politely, offering quiet words of reassurance, never boasting, never exaggerating. Her calm, composed manner spoke louder than words ever could.